the two most important things that I think every church should be investing in is their church website and their email list in their church, their mailing list. And that's because they owns digital real estate. What you're talking about, the reality of social media is it's rented space.
Hello and welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast. My name is Joel Murray. I'm the Communications and Media Officer for FIEC. I'm joined by a special guest today, Peter Murden. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Joel. How you doing?
Hello. Good. And also our regular, but on the other side today, Adrian Reynolds, the Head of National Ministries at FIEC and Elder at a local church. Adrian, hi.
Hello, Joel. I'm on the other side. What does that? That means as though it sounds quite sinister.
You're doing my job of hosting and introducing, but now you'll be asked the questions. And
it's a delight to be here, Joel, as a participant.
Good. And our conversation today is about church communications, and in particular digital communications. That's why Peter's here. He's the expert in the room. But Peter, first of all, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us how you became a believer, what your church life is like, family life, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I grew up in the church. I wouldn't say I had a dramatic conversion experience. Just kind of grew up to know and love Jesus. And of course, there were significant moments in that journey, but really can't remember a time that I didn't. And was very involved in church. Parents were, which meant I was there, so I might as well do stuff. So my first job was actually cleaning the church toilet. So that was my first paid employment at 18. But before that, I kind of
hang on. You were paid to clean the toilets.
I was paid to clean the toilets.
There's a whole podcast in that one comment, I think. But sorry.
We ran a conference centre out of the building, and so there was an imperative for the toilets to get cleaned, and
sure,
that was my job on a Friday afternoon. But I also ran the church MySpace page, or the youth group's MySpace page, really.
MySpace.
So that's going back over 15 years ago, which makes me feel quite old.
Whatever happened to MySpace?
Well, yeah, there's a whole story. There's a whole podcast in that too, Adrian, I think. And so that kind of started my digital communications journey. Went up to university, went over to the States for a few years, came back, and then started helping Christian organizations with their kind of digital marketing, which led to founding Digital Church Toolkit, which is an online training platform for churches. So imagine masterclass for churches or Netflix for church training is probably the best way to describe it. And did that for 5 years, and still super involved in that, but recently became the head of marketing at Waverley Abbey, and which is based near Farnham in Surrey. And that meant that me and my wife, we were living in Bristol. She was finishing off a PhD, and so literally about 3 weeks ago, we moved to Surrey, and so that's where we live now, in Surrey. Don't have any kids yet, no animals, which meant moving was relatively straightforward.
And I guess I've got to find this out. Not everybody will have heard of Waverley Abbey, but everybody's heard of Every Day with Jesus, haven't they?
Well, yes. I mean, I think
all part of the same family. Is that right?
All part of the same family. So if you got an email recently or letter recently saying that we are stopping Every Day with Jesus as a printed edition and turning it into an app, you can blame me for that. My wife's grandma called me up at the weekend and said, "Is it true, Peter, that Waverley Abbey are taking away my Everyday with Jesus?" I said, "Hazel, it's not Waverley Abbey taking away your Everyday with Jesus. It's me taking away your Everyday with Jesus," which wasn't quite the answer she was hoping for. But yes, so
you're not hoping for anything in the will, are you?
But anyway, not anymore. Anyway, so Everyday with Jesus is probably one of the most famous things that Waverley Abbey, or CWR as it used to be called, has done for decades. And I think at one point we were printing over 100,000 copies a year in the UK alone, let alone around the world. I think in Nigeria they were printing another couple of 100,000 too at one point, which is remarkable. And so just remarkable impact that's had over many years. And one of the things one of my jobs is to reinvent that for kind of 20s and 40s as well. So really exciting, but still very much involved in Digital Church Toolkit and helping the local church get better digital communications, which is what we're kind of doing today.
Great. I met you, or at least I saw you and got to know you a little bit from a conference when I very first started this job at FIEC. It was in the 6-week period between when I started and when we all had to go home for lockdown.
In Stanton.
Yeah, that was the
near
one.
Adrian, in fact.
Yeah, that was it. And then since then, I've been involved in various things with Digital Church Toolkit, just to think about church communications as part of my job and how we can help other churches. Maybe we'll get into that later on. But thinking about church communications, I mean, communications is a very broad term. And then in particular in church communications, we think, we talk to one another, and maybe preaching is communication. But what do we really mean when we're talking about church communications in this context? Can you help define that for us?
Yeah. So I think ultimately, like, I'm going to make a percentage up, right? 75% of what we do as churches is communicate, right? So Joel, you gave a great example there, right? You preach, we teach, and ultimately, what's the point of the church? To proclaim the gospel. That is, proclaiming is communicating. But also in the life of our churches, we're doing a bunch of communication, right? We have to get someone to do the tea and coffee rota. We have to let people know the prayer meeting is cancelled or has moved. We have to let people know what the Bible study passage is going to be for that week. There's a bunch of communicating that we're doing in our churches, whether that is kind of that, I don't want to use the word more spiritual, because of course letting people know the prayer meeting cancelled is also spiritual, but kind of what might feel more spiritual stuff like preaching and teaching, etc. And then the kind of admin of church life. And I guess when we talk about church comms or church communications, we're talking about all of that stuff, and how can that be done in a way that is, one, effective, like we want to be effective in our proclamation of the gospel and effective in our church life. And secondly, how it can be efficient. How can we use the best of the resources God has given us? And so I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about church communications, kind of all that wrapped in one, and how can we do it effectively and efficiently?
So that's helpful for me to hear, Peter, because I came into this podcast thinking, I know I'm going to hear about something else I've got to do. And, my heart slightly sinks thinking about how I'm going to squeeze it in and what's got to give. But I think if I'm understanding this right, let me see if I have understood it right. You're play back to you what you've just said is that you're talking about something I'm already doing, basically.
Yes.
So much of church life and organisation, ministry and organisation, let's call it ministry and administry, is basically around the topic of communication. So actually, these are things I'm doing already. So we're talking here about what I can do more efficiently, effectively.
Yes, and ultimately, like, everyone listening to this wants an effective ministry. They want to see people's lives changed, and they want an efficient ministry. They want it to be as easy as it can be, because it's difficult, it's full on. Caring for people, doing the gospel work is it's a sacrifice, right? Like, we're called to do it, and it's a sacrifice, but we want to make sure it's as easy as it can be, although it's going to be hard, and that we're making the most of the resources we've got. And so I think it's a really great way to think of it, Adrian, of you were actually doing all the stuff we're going to talk about today. You're probably doing, whether you're doing it effectively and efficiently is a different matter, but you're probably doing it. And so hopefully this will be, what we discussed today will help those that are listening do it better and do it easier, and ultimately see some more lives changed, and hopefully be able to spend a lot more time with their wife and their kids.
Great. I'm all ears.
Yeah, we've got all the different parts of that church ministry and administry that is there. It's like here's the big job, and then I suppose part of the question is what do we prioritize? How much time and effort do I put into different parts of what needs to be done? And the communication to a certain point, I suppose, comes naturally, because you need to tell people, so you do it. It's not really particularly thinking about it. But I suppose church communications as a topic is about intensely thinking about those communications rather than just letting it just happen and then hoping for the best. So why is that important, to step back and think about how we're communicating the different things that we're communicating? Why is it important to think about what needs to be communicated, and then how do we do those things?
So ultimately everyone listening to this is in a different context. They're in a different city or town or village. The size of their church is going to be different. The makeup of their team, whether that is paid or not paid, is going to be different, and their skill set's going to be different, right? You're going to have different, sometimes you find a church that is reasonably small, but they happen to have a couple of really amazing creatives and a couple of people that work in digital marketing in their church. And sometimes you find a church that's really large, they don't have any of that skill. I was once in a church, member of a church that was like nearly over 500 people, but they didn't have a regular drummer because they just didn't have somebody in the church who was a drummer. And it's just the nature of context we find ourselves in, right? And so one of the reasons it's important for everyone listening to sit back and have a think about it is because if you were to ask me, Joel or Adrian, what's the thing a church leader or someone listening should be prioritizing, it's very difficult for me to answer that because every context is different. And so I think that's the first thing that needs to be thought about is like, what is our context? What's the context of our vision and our mission? You know, what's the stuff that we feel that we're prioritizing in, obviously, you know, the usual stuff we expect a church to be prioritizing, you know, the gospel, etc. I mean, what's your kind of priority for the year? Where do you feel you need to be putting your time and your effort in? And then aligning that to what you should be communicating, and then how you can do that based on your context, what's going to work in a city centre. I used to live in Bristol, so city centre Bristol, the way people communicate city centre Bristol is very different than the little village in Surrey countryside I now live in, right? They're very different contexts, and the way those two kind of ecosystems work are going to be different. So that's kind of the stuff that's really important for someone to be stepping back, I think, and thinking about, because the first step to being more effective and more efficient is to be a little bit more strategic, and that's going to require a little step back and a little thinking time.
So are you, if I'm hearing this right, I think you're saying that comms isn't an end in itself. It's a means to an end.
Absolutely.
And I can already see a danger for the kind of tech savvy, early adopter, as they're sometimes called. Actually, you make these things an end in themselves, don't you?
Absolutely.
And that seems to be the way of madness, actually, in church life.
Yeah. And that's my experience of those kind of early adopter types. Often they're often male, and they're often a little geeky in a good way, and they get really passionate about something, and they think that everyone should be jumping on board with that. Which is they're often correct, but their problem is they see it as the end, not the means. And in reality, all of this is a means to, so everyone listening to this, every church, I've worked at churches, I've worked for churches, I've been involved in church, over 30 years, all my life. And every church, regardless of size or budget or tradition, has three basic challenges. How do we reach more people? How do we disciple them better? And how are we going to afford it? So evangelism, discipleship, and stewardship are kind of the three things. And like, you could probably categorize your leadership meetings or your trustee meetings or your eldership meetings or whatever, or your staff meetings or whatever. Every meeting, everything falls into either evangelism, discipleship, or stewardship, right? And so my view would be that digital communications can help us fulfill those ends, but they're not the end. Ultimately, like ministry, the only thing that's going to fulfill those ends in reality is kind of faithful ministry and, God breathing on it. We can't do it without God breathing on it. We can't control those things, but that's really the true end. And that these are means to an end, and they're there to support the stuff that a church should be doing.
Yeah. So the question isn't, we need to be on Instagram. What on earth should we do on it? But the real question is, we need to disciple our people. How could Instagram be a way that we could do that?
Yeah. Or the other question is what's our church comms for? So is our church comms for reaching people, or is it for discipleship? And if it's for reaching people, where are the people in our community we're trying to reach? If it's for discipleship, it's where the people in our congregation that we're trying to reach. So even straight away, you get two different questions that might lead you to two different platforms. If you feel your social media is for discipling people, and it just so happens that all your congregation on Facebook, then you might not need Instagram. But if you think it's for evangelism, and you're in a city centre church, you feel called to students, you probably shouldn't be on Facebook, you probably should be on TikTok. So like, it all depends on the end that you're trying to fulfill that's going to establish your means.
You're just hinting at something there that I find quite overwhelming, Peter, which is the short-lived nature of a lot of social media platforms, or communication platforms, let's call them. we were laughing earlier about MySpace, but the way that things come and go, and the way that I feel, I mean, I'm 54, the way I feel that I sort of get used to something and then it's kind of fallen out of fashion. And I guess probably Twitter, X, whatever we call it these days, seems to be heading that way a little bit. There's certainly less kind of enthusiasm for it seems to me. So, how can we deal with the brevity of some of these communication tools in the context of building a long-term ministry?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is I'd focus on the stuff that's been true probably now for a couple of decades. So like a church website is going to be, websites aren't going to go out of fashion anytime soon, right?
Okay, so we should be including our website in that kind of communication package. It's not just about social media.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Joel's heard me say this probably 1,000 times. The two most important things that I think every church should be investing in is their church website and their email list in their church, their mailing list. And that's because they're owned digital real estate. What you're talking about, the reality of social media is it's rented space. It's a bit like renting a house. Your landlord can decide what they're going to do with it tomorrow. And of course you have some rights, but in reality, the landlord wins eventually. It's the same with social media, is that that's rented space from a private entity, and that private entity is going to do whatever it wants. And there's a big opportunity there, I think. But in reality, the owned digital real estate, the stuff that a church has full control over, is one, their website, and two, their church mailing list. And I think putting those stakes in the ground are really important because that allows you to have a consistency in your communication. And then social media is like the icing on top of a cake, right? It's the exciting stuff. It's bright and shiny. I think there's a huge opportunity there, but in reality, it does change. And so don't rely on the amount of times I Google a church, just moved, looking for churches. You Google a church, you click on the website and it takes you straight to their Facebook page. That fills me with dread for that church because reality.
Or tells you about the Christmas services.
Yeah, absolutely. But that fills me with dread because Facebook could pull that page tomorrow. Facebook could shut down tomorrow. I mean, it could go bust tomorrow. And, it probably won't, but it could. And so we want to make sure that you're building at least your foundation is on kind of own digital real estate. And that's going to be a website and a church mailing list.
Does that need to be really expensive? I mean, that just sounds like, setting up a Facebook page for church sounds fairly low maintenance or fairly easy in. Setting up a website, man, that just feels like a whole different world.
Yeah, so it doesn't need to be expensive. And there are ways you can do that are going to be cheaper. So you don't, I think there was at one point where you would have had to pay the developer to build your website, and that was going to cost you minimum £10,000 or whatever. It's not like that anymore. There are ways to go and get it. If you have someone who is 21 in your church, they can probably know how to build your website relatively quickly. The quality of that might be questionable depending on how good they are, but they're going to be able to do that for you. So there's a couple of platforms. One would be Squarespace. It's a little bit of a higher investment, but it's almost impossible to break. And so almost anyone listening my grandma could probably build herself a Squarespace website. So if there's someone listening and you've got a little
she's not talking to you.
Yeah, well, that's my wife's grandma, my actual grandma's
okay.
The Squarespace website is going to cost you a little bit of investment. We're less than £1,000. I don't know the price off the top of my head, so I can't pull it up, but less than £1,000. So there is an investment there, but you can't break it and it's going to look all right at the end of it. There are some free platforms. Wix will be one that you can get a free website on Wix. And so you would have to pay the minimum fee for your website address, your www. But they're often they're $9.99 a year, so £9.99 a year. Then a free website on Wix. So there are ways to do it if you know how to do it. So I don't think it needs to be a huge price. You can go out and pay, £4,000 or £5,000 to get someone to build you a really nice website if you think that this is something that we really, really need to be investing in. And I would suggest that, today's Friday. My in-laws are here this weekend. Tonight we might go out for dinner. And what am I going to do when I look for a restaurant to go to? I'm going to go on their website and check their menu out because I don't want any surprises. I want to find out what the food's like. I'm going to read some reviews and I want to find out what the price is going to be. And the reality is at some point that everyone listening is going to do some form of outreach and they want people to come to their church for that, right? Whether that's a gospel service or whether that's a particular outreach event or a kids club or a community event, whatever they're doing, they're going to want people to come. And in the kind of social climate we're in, people are not used to going to church. And so they're going to want to find out about it before they turn up. And how they're going to do that is go on your church website. And so I think there is actually a gospel imperative to make sure that we have some form of digital presence because it actually, if you don't, my suspicion is you're harboring your ability to actually do some form of evangelism because people will want to check you out before they turn up. They want to know what they're going to, they don't want to get.
Just because that's the way the world is.
That's in the same way that everyone who, if you're going to go out for dinner this weekend, you're going to check a website out of the restaurant. It's the same people who go to church. So, and people don't know what church is. We're not in a climate anymore where people used to go to church as a child or whatever. And so that probably makes it even more likely. So I think that's the other reason people should have a website, not just because it's kind of, you can do it for cheap. I think because it actually is going to help us fulfill our calling, fulfill our mission to proclaim the gospel.
That idea of real estate is really helpful, I find, because it's something that you own. That means you have control. And back when I used to work with in the business industry, working with restaurants and cafes and shops and stuff, the amount who would have a Facebook page and that would be their thing. And it's just so dangerous, isn't it? I think that thinking about that real estate, where can you have some presence online that is going to be down to you, what you include on it, that is going to be safe and stable. I think that's a really important thing. A good place to start.
And then once you've got that safe and stable, Joel, you can ride the wave if you want to of the latest social media platform that's working, right? Social media is about attention, and so it's worth going where the attention is. But once you've got that stable bedrock, you can ride the wave of attention, ride the wave of those platforms if you want to. But you've got that kind of bedrock of safety and security behind you digitally.
Yeah, and when someone may come across you on social media, then the website is the place where they can delve into the details.
Yeah,
because often a social media post will last a couple of minutes, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Attention spans are so small, but if you grab their attention then and they want to find out more, then how can they do it? Another 90-second video isn't going to do the job, but a website where your stuff is going to be a good place for people.
But what's helpful there, just for me to hear in what you were saying, Peter, is that actually you're constantly thinking about what we're trying to do, and then you think about what tools do you need to do it. And that's even the case with the website, right? What are we trying to do? We're trying to give people information about church. There's going to be quite a lot of static information, probably.
Yeah.
There's going to be some information, dynamic information, maybe about events. There's going to be information for people in church, the kind of the more internal stuff, maybe. So actually, by thinking what we're trying to do, that's what shapes what your website might look like, or even what provider you might use because of the various tools they give. So if providing sermon audio, for example, is really important to help people in the church who can't make it to church, that's going to be maybe a different provider than if you don't want to do that. Yeah. And that's not important to you. So it's really helpful to hear that, how thinking through what we're trying to achieve and why we're doing it before we do the how. Yeah, that must apply to all of church life, mustn't it? It's not just communications. Actually, that's your sermon preaching program, your kids clubs activities. That basically that's how church life should be, isn't it?
Absolutely, and also like a good website. We keep coming back to the website thing. It's going to save you time. So think about the amount of time you spend answering a text message or an email or phone call about what time the Bible study is, right? Well, if your website's up to date and working well, that will do that for that church member. And so actually like having some of these things in place in the long run is going to save you time and energy and mean that you don't have to spend, an hour a week answering emails or telling people a time of an event, which, I've worked in a church office. I know how many phone calls you get asking that question. So
thinking about maybe some of those exciting things in terms of social media, or maybe just kind of new technology that's coming out. Can you share a couple of kind of trends that you're seeing that's providing fruit for various churches? Maybe not necessarily that someone's going to pile into from scratch.
So the first thing, and anyone that's opened social media recently in the past couple of years would have seen this, is kind of short form video, right? Whether that's kind of short cooking videos, inspirational quotes, even politicians started jumping on this, right? Putting together like little 30-second social media clips. I think that's a huge opportunity. Video is how people are engaging in social media these days. And if you go back maybe 10 years, it was often just static photos and graphics. Video is kind of where things are going. So short form video content. I think that is kind of giving people, whether that's entertainment or education, is often kind of the two categories they come in. Church is probably going to sit somewhere in the middle of those two, but maybe geared towards maybe more education. So that's kind of the first thing, short form video content. The second thing, and this might be kind of controversial, but AI, things like ChatGPT and other AI platforms are, I think, for digital communication perspective, a really interesting way of saving time, being more efficient. I think that's a very interesting way to go. And definitely, if you look in the commercial world, they are embedding those kind of systems into most of the digital platforms that we use, because they recognize that that's gonna be more efficient. So that's kind of really interesting. We can break that down some more if we want. I think the third thing I'll say is, and I think there's a huge opportunity for the church here as well, is that people are starting to, the pendulum is swinging towards authenticity. If you look at what particularly Gen Z are craving, is it's actually not this kind of fake, well-polished social media presence that we all think. It's actually this kind of authenticity about life and about the challenges and opportunities we all face. And I think the church can live in that space really well, right?
So that's really interesting for me, Peter, because I see when I hear video, I think lights, 4K cameras, professional boom microphones.
A bit like your setup today, Adrian.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas actually, most of us have got our whole video editing, recording and editing suite in our phones, haven't we?
Absolutely.
And actually, I think one of the phenomena, it seems to me, just observing media, not as an expert, but as an observer over the last few years, is just the way that a phone taken video with the audio, even from a microphone, which tends to be substandard on a phone, but even with the audio from a phone is basically acceptable. People will happily watch that, share that. And we can create those kinds of things in church pretty easily, can't we?
We can. And actually, a lot of churches listening would have already been doing that through the pandemic. So they've learned the skills.
Yeah, that's right.
They've learned the skills on how to do that. And those skills were not just for a pandemic. The opportunity was always there, and the kind of stuff was available before the pandemic. That just kind of exposed the need for it, and also forced us into a scenario where we had to use it. And of course, there's some stuff that the digital's never going to replace. I'm not claiming it's going to replace everything. Of course it's not. But I think it's a huge opportunity. And you're right in saying, if you would just turn on any 24-hour news channel right now and watch any report from anywhere around the world, the likelihood of that being off someone's mobile phone is incredibly, incredibly high.
Well, the BBC, the new revamped BBC News studio, has a phone-shaped screen.
Yeah.
Portrait. They've taken away their landscape screens.
It's absolutely
very interesting. Yeah.
And so leaning into that, I think, that when we say video content, it doesn't have to look like a TV channel. It can just look like you on your phone or you on your computer.
Yeah. So can I just make that real then for me? So a little, I don't know, minute long, even if that little testimony from someone in church, filmed on a handheld phone, used in the right way, that can be really powerful, right? It doesn't need to be scripted, auto cue, all the rest of it.
No, not at all. There's a few other ideas I've got. The other one would be that if some people listening might be the person that preaches regularly on a Saturday night, you could jump on and do a little video to give people a little preview of what you're going to preach on. Hi, I'm Adrian. I'm preaching tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm preaching on XYZ. We'd really love to see you there. We're going to be discussing how this is going to affect this bit of your life. And so suddenly you're kind of previewing it. You might give someone the opportunity to pre-read the scripture you're going to preach from, which would going to mean that they're going to take on your preaching even better. And also it might encourage some people that haven't been for a few weeks to come because they're really interested in the topic you're going to preach on.
I like it.
So that the other option you've got is you could do the opposite of that, would be in the middle of the week. So on like Tuesday or Wednesday night, you could kind of, depending on the way you preach in your church. So it might be that your preaching is more doctrinal based, not practical based. But of course, there's always a practical application. Yeah. And so on a Wednesday night, you could jump on and do a short little video of what does this now mean for us? So we did the doctrine of giving. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the practicalities of budgeting. Right, or whatever. So you can kind of make it real for people in their lives, and actually you'll then meaning that Sunday message doesn't stay on a Sunday, right? As a preacher and a teacher and a minister, we never want just our ministry to stick to the confines of a Sunday morning or Sunday evening service. We actually want it to impact the person's everyday, right? And so the opportunity social media gives us is to stay connected to our congregations throughout the week, which will ultimately mean our ministry has bigger impact because it's embedding into their daily life.
Yeah, and that's just bringing it full circle, that we want people to hear from God's word and then for them to dwell richly in it.
Absolutely.
And one way we can help them to do that is by using digital communications. So that's good. Yeah, I think those two bits about short form video and authenticity link together really nicely, because people want authenticity and you can do that really quickly with a little video.
Yeah.
And doing it just as a kind of a selfie on your phone isn't the end of the world if it's not high production, because it's authentic, it's real, isn't it? And then the third one, we can tie in all three. AI, this is it. So I was on the webinar with Digital Church Toolkit just this week with Josh, who was talking about AI in different ways that church communicators could use AI in various ways. Can you tell us a little bit about the practicalities of Digital Church Toolkit? So if people are listening, they think, right, I don't really know where to start, but I've bought into this idea. I want to think about it more. How can they get involved? What can Digital Church Toolkit do to help?
Yeah, so like I was saying at the beginning, Joel, Digital Church Toolkit is effectively an online training platform. And so that looks like three different things. The first thing that looks like is an online learning community. Joel, you're part of that. That's what you were engaging in this week. And as part of that, you get access to a supported community of over 100 members of people who are doing what you're doing. They are church comms people doing it in their church. Most people in there are in a church under 100. Most people in there are either voluntary or it's just part of a paid job they have. So they're a church administrator and comms is a small aspect of a larger job. So, it's not a group of people who are doing this on a really professional level. They're on the front line, on the cold face, scrapping around, trying to make it happen. And there's that sort of community for them. And as part of that, we do a weekly training live every other week. And so Josh this week, who's my co-founder at Digital Church Toolkit, was doing a session on AI and how that could help churches. So that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect is an online library of e-courses, and that's an ever-growing library of e-courses. So our flagship e-course is called Church Social Media Made Simple. So church social media stresses you out, that e-course will take out the stress and enable you to have kind of an effective social media presence and easy to manage social media presence for your church. And then we also offer, on the top end of that, we can offer coaching, one-to-one coaching to help churches kind of muddle their way through if they want some kind of more customized, personalized kind of support. And we have kind of different price points for those packages. And you can find out all that information at www.digitalchurchtoolkit.com.
Great.
And presumably, can I just ask a very practical question? Now, if I'm the senior pastor, clearly this is important to me because it goes to the heart of church ministry. But I should be thinking about releasing other people to do this stuff rather, not just taking it on myself. And I guess even if I'm I pastored a church very near where you're living, actually, in Farnham. I pastored a church near there, 50 members, that kind of size. And a lot of stuff fell to me. But actually finding someone else in the church to release, to take control of this, that's a good way of training people up, actually, a good way of not burdening myself with more stuff.
Yeah. I think every church you should have someone who I like the phrase I like to use is championing digital communications. Doesn't mean they have to be doing all of it. And sometimes the best person to champion this is the senior pastor, right? Is the senior minister, because they want to champion it. They are championing it. Sometimes though, it's not in their skill set, it's not in their passion set either. They would much rather be doing something else, and that's fine, right? We all have our kind of nuances and what we interest us and what we feel called to. So, but I think finding someone to champion it is really, really, really important. And the churches that are doing it well, regardless of size and resource, are ones that have found someone who's going to really run with it and own it and champion it in their environment.
Yeah. Well, that's been really helpful and interesting and stimulating, Peter. So thank you so much for giving some of your expertise.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
I hope that people who've been listening have found it helpful as well. It's been Independence. You can like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. Leave a review, share it with the people who you think would also find it helpful. And we hope to see you again next time. So thanks, Peter. Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.